Hi guys, I'm Alyssa and I'm back with another video. Today I want to share with you a recommendations video. The recommendations video I'm going to be sharing with you today is non-SFF recommendations, so books that is not part of the speculative umbrella, including science fiction, fantasy, as well as horror. So these will be books that is generally just contemporaries, regular thrillers, mysteries, and other type stuff that is not under that speculative umbrella. I've narrowed it down to 10 different authors of books. I don't think I have a specific favorite out of these, but they are all really great reads and different, and I don't think they all represent some different things, I think, almost. And yeah, so let's get started. The first one I want to recommend is a Danish author. It's the only Danish author that I've read that's not fantastic, like a fantasy author or something like that. And it is Jussi Adler-Olsen, who writes the Department Q series. This is one of the first book series that I started reading that wasn't fantasy or science fiction, so it has sort of special place in my reading experience. I think back in 2012 I started out with the first book, The Keeper of Lost Causes, in English, and the Danish book is called Kvinden i Buret. And this series follows is a detective series that follows these cold cases. I don't think it's like other police detective series. It is a series that follows this detective called Carl Mørk, who is on a job one day with his working buddies, and they are a really tight group of colleagues and friends outside of the job as well. Something goes horribly wrong this day, and it ends up with one of his partners dying. The other one goes limp from, I think, neck down, if I remember correctly, and himself, he get off with just a scrape to the to his forehead, with a bullet scrape to his forehead, and so he's out of job for a while. But then in the beginning of this series he comes back to work. No one really wants to work with him because he's kind of a difficult person, and I really didn't like him in the beginning, but I still found the whole writing of the book really interesting and super compelling. But he comes back to his work at the police station, and they just don't want him to be, they don't want to deal with him because he's kind of difficult, and so they decide to create this fake department kind of thing called Department Q, shove him in the basement where he could just sit by himself and grumble over things, supposedly to go over these very cold cases that no one's been able to solve. And one day he gets an assistant called Asad, who is this Syrian refugee, and everything sort of spurs off from there, and they go into the investigation of the first case. And then over the course of the series you see how this department changes, and what I really like about them is that the mysteries themselves, and or the way that it's built up, that you sort of see things from like a past perspective of what happened back in the day and what is happening now, sort of shifting back and forth. Sometimes you have a perspective from the villain, the bad person who did the things, and he always explores both like the powerful people, but also just general things that happened in the Danish history that wasn't really very good. And the way he develops Carl's character over the books is really interesting to follow, especially because he goes through a lot of guilt because of what happened. And I think the sort of psychological aspects of this series is something that's really important to the story as well, and I really enjoy it. The first 4 books has been filmatized in Denmark, and they're just nothing like the books. They are good enough films, but the books are just so much better, and there's so much more depth to especially Carl's person. And then I love the working relationships between Carl and Asad, and in the later books we also get another assistant called Rose, who is even more strange than Asad, and they all make this really fun, interesting team. I've read the first 6 books in the series. I still need to read the 2 most recent books. And the first one is called, in Denmark, is called Selfies, but I think it's called something else. I'll put the English cover here. And the most recent one is called Victim 2117, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And I am hoping to maybe being able to fit it in to my reading soon, because I really would like to continue it. The reason I wanted to pick this up was because I was like, I always read fantasy, urban fantasy, and it's fun, but why wouldn't I like something else? It's the first time I sort of expanded my own reading, and I was thinking, I do enjoy watching crime shows, especially like these darker, heavier kind of shows. Like those type of shows I really enjoyed following, because it was dark, it was thrilling, and I kind of liked the vibe of it. And I wanted sort of that type of thing. Back then, the Millennium trilogy of books by Stieg Larsson was super popular, and I knew everyone was reading them, but I was more interested in this series because I don't know why it spoke to me more than the Stieg Larsson books, even though I do believe that the Stieg Larsson books is probably really great. I haven't read them, so I can't say, and I don't know if I ever will be, but yeah, I definitely recommend these, and they are often recommended in alongside the Stieg Larsson books, but I don't know how much you can take from it. But if you think that the topics of this sounds interesting, then definitely make it a consideration. My favorite book I've read of this series is The Macro Effect, which is the 5th book, or A Conspiracy of Faith, which is the 3rd book, which goes into religion and people who don't like people who are very religious and stuff, and it was super interesting, scarily so. The second author is a completely different ball game. That is Nora Roberts, who I have mentioned her a lot of times. He also writes in the paranormal genre, but the books that I know from her is mostly her romantic suspense books, like the standalone books that she's written. I read the majority of them, and my personal recommendations from this author is Northern Lights. I really enjoyed that one. It's set in Alaska, following this man who moves from a bigger city, is Baltimore, I think, deciding he doesn't want that high busy city life type of job as a policeman. He's a policeman, but he moves to Alaska to become the police sheriff in this town. And then we have, when he comes there, they discover a body in the mountain. Like, it was some people out hiking, and frozen body is found, and he takes it up to himself. He needs to figure out what's happened, but people don't really want him to solve the case, obviously. So it's a bit suspenseful in that, but I just really enjoy these small town settings, and Nora Roberts does these romantic suspense books really well. I don't know if I really particularly enjoyed the romantic element of this one. I don't remember that, but I just love this book overall. Another book that I loved and read from her is The Witness, which is a more recent book of hers, I think from 2008, so still not super recent, but I really enjoyed it. It is following this girl who witnesses something that done by the Russian mafia people, like gang, and she was not supposed to see this, so she's on the run away from them, trying to hide away, and they just want to find her because she's a witness to something that she shouldn't have seen, and they want to end her life basically. And so she changes her identity completely, moves into a small town, and that is where things happen. I love this book so much. Yeah. And another one of my favorites was Angel's Fall, another small town setting. I just really love small town settings when Nora Roberts writes them, because she does it so well. And yeah, I need to get back into reading more of her standalone books, because I think she does so well in them. She also has a lot of great romance series that are great. I've personally read the In Boonesboro books or the Born In books, but I think both of them doesn't hold as much, like doesn't mean as much to me as the standalone books does. And then there's also her more in-depth series, which is set in the future, so that is the speculative part of the umbrella that I've read a lot of books from, and I really enjoy it. However, I definitely recommend Nora Roberts if you're into romance. I think she is, that's a reason why she's so popular, that's the reason why she's published so many books. She's a really, really big staple on the romance genre in general. The next author I'm recommending is an author that I know you've heard me talk about a lot over the last couple of years since I discovered the series. I've been working through the Gaslight mystery series by Victoria Thompson, so obviously I want to recommend this one. This is a historical fiction mystery set in the late 1800s in New York. It follows two people. Mostly it follows the perspectives of Sarah Brand, who is this widowed midwife who works as a midwife. She comes from a really, really important family in New York, but has sort of become estranged from that family because of her choices to marry a doctor below her own standards. And they all hope that when her husband died, that she would come back to them and start searching for a suitable husband for herself. But she decides to just stay a widow and stay working as a midwife, which was not seen as a very good thing from her own parents' perspective. But she's very firm in her beliefs that she wants to continue the route that she started. Then we have Detective Frank Malloy, who works in a police department that is very corrupt. There's a lot of people not really doing their job, but he believes that he has to try and do everything he can in order to find the right killers or murderers. Or in the beginning of this, there was a sort of tension between Sarah and Frank because of how things that happened in their lives that made them a little bit less trusty with, in Sarah's case, the police, and with Frank's case, actually midwives. And there's a good reason for the things that they are feeling towards each other. But as time goes, obviously their connection changes and they start believing in the other one and becomes friends and allies and helps each other out. And I love the development of the characters in this one. I think the most important thing about this series is that, yes, it has like a mystery that's a new detective mystery every time with every book, but I don't think you can read this series out of order and really get the right feel of it, because the characters has such a big important part of this series that reading them out of order you wouldn't get the same vibe from it, because the characters develop so much with every book, and they change their relationship over the course of the books in different ways, and extra characters are added in on the later on that it becomes really, really important. And I think because of that, I think you should definitely read them in order, but they are all really great. I haven't rated any of these books less than 4 stars, so I definitely think they are worth the read, and they are really strong mysteries as well. The next book I want to recommend is a romance. It's a sports romance. It's called Kulti by Mariana Zapata. Mariana Zapata in general, I think, is going to become a really, really strong author in my book. I have read 2 books by her, but this one is definitely my favorite. When I read this book initially, I felt like I was reading a book that was about me, myself. There were so many things about the main character that just I related so much to, in terms of how she was thinking, how she was with her family, some of the personality traits, and also the fact that she was a sports person was something that was really something that I've missed from sports romances, or romances in general, that people were actually really good at what they were doing in terms of the sport. And I've always loved football, soccer, and this obviously follows that. It follows this girl who is a soccer player. She is in her late 20s, I believe, if I remember correctly, and she suddenly gets a new coach, and the coach turns out to be one she always had a big crush on. It was her favorite footballer up through the teenage years, and so she's completely confused and don't know how to act, and then finds out that he's a real jerk to her. So it starts out with a really haters to lovers kind of thing. Like they really hate each other, but then they develop this really strong friendship over the book that later turns into a romance or a romantic relationship. And I love that it takes so much time to develop the characters, to develop their relationship, and it makes me even more excited about it. I was super into this book and I really recommend it. Yeah, so I also read Wall of Winnipeg and Me, which is a NFL football player and a fake marriage kind of thing, and it was also really good, and it had the same build up of the characters' relationship, which I think she does so well, and I will want to read more of Mariana Zapata's books in the future. I'm extremely excited to read Lubokov with Love. I think that is another book that I really want to read, about ice skating, I think. Yeah, so the next book I want to recommend is The Romanov Prophecy by Steve Berry. Steve Berry writes similarly to Dan Brown. It is he takes something ancient, talks about conspiracy theories takes conspiracy theories, things that has been talked about this, and make it into a high stakes adventure novel kind of thing. So in that way it's a little bit similar to Dan Brown. I just think personally that Steve Berry seems to have researched a little bit more about the actual events that happened back in these times. Don't get me wrong, I think Dan Brown is definitely fine, but I do believe that Steve Berry has been better in my book. And what I really liked about this one is obviously because it talked about the conspiracy theories surrounding the Romanov family and what happened back then, and takes what if Anastasia and Alexei didn't die back then, what would happen then. And we have this lawyer type person in Russia trying to oversee them actually putting back the Romanov family in line in Russia, and something happens during that, and he gets the hand of some information about what happened back then that makes it possible that there is even more we didn't know, and there might actually be a true heir to the throne. And then suddenly he is being hunted down by Russian people who don't want this to happen. And definitely a really high stakes kind of book where you don't really know what's going to happen next, and I'm constantly on the edge of my seat trying to figure out what's going to happen next, and I really enjoyed that. I have also read other books by Steve Berry. I've read 2 of the Cotton Malone books, and I'm really looking forward to reading on. I just recently purchased a couple of books that I intend to read at some point when I unwrap them. So yeah, I definitely highly recommend Steve Berry if you're into that kind of genre at all. The next author is a chick lit author. She is known for like chick lit, and that is Sophie Kinsella. I really enjoy her standalone books, the majority of them. I haven't read her most recent ones, I would admit that, and there's a couple of them that's not as good, but I vastly prefer her standalones to her Shopaholic series, which I've read 2 books from and just thought they were okay, but sort of the same thing if you read either of them. But one of my favorites is I've Got Your Number by Sophie Kinsella. I also really like The Undomestic Goddess, and I also really enjoyed Can You Keep a Secret, but it's been a while since I read them, but I still think fondly of them. I think Finding Audrey is a young adult book that I also actually really enjoyed. So I think Sophie Kinsella is really good for that feel-good kind of fun romantic comedy kind of book. So if you like chick flicks on movies, like fun rom-coms, then I think you'll enjoy Sophie Kinsella. She has that vibe to it, so definitely consider her if you think that sounds fun. Next The next author on my list is one I've recently read. Actually, the next book on my list is one I've recently read. This is the only thing that I've read from this author. I think she only has 2 books out currently, but I'm very interested in reading all of them. And the book that I'm talking about is Love from A to Z by S.K. Ali. This is a young adult romance, contemporary romance book. It follows these 2 perspectives. It follows this girl who is a Muslim activist kind of person who speaks up for herself one day when a teacher speaks very with Islamophobic things to her, and she is sort of thrown out of that school, and she's punished because she's thrown out, and so she has to go to Qatar to try and figure herself out, I think. And on the other hand, we have this half Chinese who was converted into Islam when he was 11, and he has recently been diagnosed with MS. He hasn't told anyone about this. MS is something that his mother passed away from. He hasn't told his father. No one in his close family has been told because he doesn't want them to deal with his problem. And he also has to go to Qatar for something, or they meet on the plane and it's a chance meeting. But what I really love about this book actually is that they have their separate friend group, and they have a lot of things going on with themselves, with these friends that they have and their family and what happens. And then they have a couple of times where they're meeting up and sort of start this fun relationship, and it's just so beautifully written. It's such a cute romance, and it deals with some difficult topics in terms of Islamophobia and in terms of this very serious illness about that he is carrying, but it's not like taking over the plot. It's just still balanced. It's everything really, really well, and still makes you understand how serious an illness, for instance, the MS is, and but also shows you how you can live with it in a way. I just super enjoyed this one, and I can't wait to read on more from this author. I just love how well it's told. It's just become one of my favorite books of like contemporary books of all time, especially young adult contemporaries. The next one is also one I'm super excited about, and this is an author that I've read all of their books, but my favorite was the most recent one, and I read this book back in June, and that is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. She is becoming one of the most talked about authors on YouTube, like recently, I think, and I'm super happy about that. I think what she does is so amazing. She has a way of writing these really difficult topics and just make you it's kind of uncomfortable when you're reading them because they're so harsh topics, so dark topics, and still you can't put the books down because you really want to know what's going to happen next. And the way she solves everything out by the end of them, it's just always so perfect. And I love that the Poet X and this one is written in verse, so it and that just gives it a whole other vibe to it. And she narrates her own books when it's the slam poetry type stuff, or a verse when the book is written in verse, and the way that she narrates it just makes it even more come to life. Like it gives such an emotional punch to the story as well. Everything about these books I enjoy, and my favorite is Clap When You Land, the most recent one, but I still think that The Poet X is excellent. I also think With the Fire on High is really good. It is different because it's more of a written novel, but it's still written with this whimsical way, and it sort of has a sort of magical feel to it. She is so amazing, and I think I'm going to read everything that she publishes in the future. It's just become an listen author for me, very quickly. Yeah. Another author that I am super excited to read more from is Eliza Cole. I've read The Extraordinary Union, which is the first book in the Loyal League series. This is a trilogy that's set in the Civil War era, and it follows the first one here follows this girl, a black girl who becomes a spy. She is voluntarily go in as a slave, mute slave, like pretend that she's mute so that she doesn't reveal anything that she shouldn't, and she has sort of photographic memory, so she has to see what's going on and then report back to the loyalty, like the people that she works for. And then there is this guy who is a white man who comes from Ireland, I believe he's Irish if I remember correctly, and comes to help with this, and he is on the same side as her, but she doesn't know this, but he comes in to also do his own side of spying, and they sort of end up finding out that they are working for the same cause, and they help each other out, and they form this romance, and it's really, really incredible. I just super enjoy Eliza Cole's writing. I'm currently listening to When No One's Watching, and that is super intense right now. I'm really close to finishing it, and I'm really loving it, and I think that she does so well. I can't wait to read all of her books. I think that she's going to become one of my favorite authors as well. I think she does so many different things. She also has a little bit in the science fiction element, but these books that I've read so far are very much just non-SFF related. It is like, this is a historical interracial romance, and the accidental royals, I think that's what she calls the other series, is a contemporary romance, and then we have this When No One Is Watching, which is a thriller, romance, horror kind of thing, and super on point about what's going on right now. Honestly, like some of the things that happens, I'm like, yeah. And the last book I want to mention is a middle grade book. It's a middle grade book I read just the year that I started this channel, actually back in 2016. I didn't know what to expect when I first picked it up, but it is Wonder by Rj Palacio. As someone who has experienced bullying growing up, this was so hard to read, and I cried multiple times reading it because of the things that Augie experienced. But I also would like to say that the way the author handled the theme and how it progressed through the book and how everything was told, I really enjoyed it, and I really think that it developed in a really interesting way, and I think that it discussed the topic of bullying really, really well, and discussion of how you live with this something about yourself that you're very different than others, because he has this illness, I don't know what you call it, the fact that he is born with a facial structure that was very different from everyone else's, so he has multiple surgeries and trying to make him work a function, like survive, and then everyone are afraid of him because he looks different than everyone else, and they bully him because of that. And then there are also like perspectives from family members, especially I think the sister's perspective was so interesting, because she was sort of forgotten, because they all wanted to make sure that August was noticed when he was home, but so then they forgot their older sister, because she was normal, she could do everything on her own, and that part of it was really an interesting aspect to it, and I just really enjoyed this, and I didn't think that I would be so emotionally invested in this. Still an important book to me in terms of my own personal reading journey, and so that's why it's also on this list. I could have mentioned a lot more authors on this list, but I decided to narrow it down to 10. I hope that you enjoy this. Let me know if you have read any of these authors, if you've read in the books that I've been mentioning, and what you thought of them. Are you planning on picking any of the books up? I would also really like to know that. What are some of your favorite non-SFF authors or books that you've read? Then let me know. If you know my reading taste, maybe you have some specific recommendations towards what I've been talking about today. Definitely always recommend them down below. So yeah, this was everything that I had for you today. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next video very soon.